our guest here. Joining Kevin and I is in studio is Jenny Horn, TD Ameritrade Network contributor and the VP of Research from LikeFolio.com, Megan Brantley. Good morning to both of you guys. Hope you had a great weekend. Let's talk some fintech here and kind of the new age of finance in terms of financial services. That, of course, includes names like Square and PayPal.
Yes, and this has been an awfully fun story to cover over the last year because, of course, we were pushed into this world of more contactless payments, and both of these companies operating in more digitized markets really stood to benefit. So Square and PayPal were obviously huge successors of this sort of, contactless world where we needed to be digital. But to really paint a picture of how big the scale of these companies are, PayPal operates in 202 countries and processes payments in 25 different currencies. They grew their active accounts by about 20% year over year in the first quarter, with their total payment volume surging 50%. So this is no small company. So to really hear those growth metrics is actually phenomenal. Now, PayPal just announced actually the Venmo, its app, will be monetizing some of its services effective July 20th. They're going to really monetize the way users sort of use their products, sell and buy products on their accounts, which has actually pushed the stock higher today. They also just announced that they will be raising their processing fees for their U.S. merchants on August 2nd. They will raise it to 3.49% from 2.9%. I'm not sure why they just didn't round to 3.5%, but nonetheless, this will not affect their in-person QR code transactions, but this will obviously affect their U.S. merchants. And a lot of analysts liked this news because it shows really PayPal's sort of pricing power they have now. However, there is a question of if this opens the door for competition, which then, of course, enters Square, which grew its first quarter sales over 260% in the first quarter year over year. They also really shrugged off their 2020 bottom pretty easily, due largely to their growth of their Cash App, which some of these growth metrics are also crazy. They generate profits of roughly $500 million on growth of 170% for just their Cash App alone. They also have committed to sort of focusing on building this US-based open source solar-powered Bitcoin mining facility, which with the crypto craze we've seen over the last few months has been a great thing because there is a lot of concern of some of these energy constraints surrounding Bitcoin. Now, I think what's interesting is typically we compare these two like competitors, but I really see this digital payment market being one that has a lot of room to run. It's actually crazy when you look at how much people are still using cold hard physical cash. So I think both of these companies stand to potentially benefit in the long term. What is the concern to me are some of these more traditional credit companies, which is actually what our first tweeter today talks about, which says, MasterCard and Visa deserve the premium because of the continued growth they have seen for years. But I think this will change. Fintech banks and new forms of payment processing may break their hold on the space. I like both Square and PayPal. So I think this is a really good point because I think that typically, we put Square and PayPal head to head. I think that maybe this space needs to be compared more to the traditional credit banking system, because I do think that right now the future is sort of contactless. We have Apple Pay, we have Alphabet's Google Pay. I mean, there's all these different forms of payments now competing in this space. But our next tweet does naturally compare the two because that is the majority of the buzz on social media, which says, yes, and here's another prediction. I believe Square will outperform PayPal over the next 10 years. Now, Square does have crazy growth numbers, but they are still significantly smaller than PayPal. And I think this is a really interesting prediction. I think that there's probably, Megan, a lot of, behind this sort of prediction has to do with the crypto craze, because Square has really made a name for itself with this Bitcoin. So I'm just curious to know how really Square relates to this whole crypto thing and how really Square versus PayPal compared to each other.
Yeah, so it's been really interesting to track not only cryptocurrencies in the past year, but to see the different ways that consumers are able to buy, sell, and hold these cryptocurrencies. And so naturally, as Square and PayPal both have, they're both digital wallets, it makes sense that they would want to, have their hands in this activity, in this action. And what we see when we look at these mentions of people who are talking about engaging with cryptocurrencies, specifically within Square's Cash App, which offers consumers to buy, sell, or hold Bitcoin, and then PayPal and now Venmo, which have a little bit of a broader offering. They support Bitcoin, but they also support Ethereum and Litecoin. We see something really interesting, especially in the last month. So obviously there's this huge uptick, this huge surge in demand in the past year. We actually saw these demand mentions. Obviously they're higher than 2018 because a lot of these functionalities didn't exist then. But really what you see is you can see that green line, and those are the mentions of people who are talking about using Cash App for these cryptocurrencies, these buy, sell, things of that nature. And you can see a pretty steep, it's starting to drop off. Now, obviously, it's much higher than it was last year. All of these digital wallets that we're tracking when it comes to cryptocurrency have recorded, triple digit year-over-year growth. But you're starting to see PayPal and Venmo both on a more upward trajectory, I would say, a steeper growth rate comparatively than Square. And I think that a lot of this just has to do with the fact that this is brand new for Venmo. So PayPal, who of course owns Venmo, they launched this at the end of April, and we're really starting to see an uptick since then. Obviously, a smaller piece of the pie, but they have, the most to gain, the most to grow, I would argue. And then also you have PayPal, who's doing really well now that they have kind of this synergy of brands in the digital wallet. These are mentions of just investing in crypto in general. So that blue line, those are people who are talking about buying or investing in cryptocurrencies. And I think it's interesting because you can see this huge spike even in the last month. And now we're seeing those levels still start to settle in higher. So if you look at the overall growth trend, if you were to extend this on a 30-day moving average, it would be a little bit of a much smoother line and definitely up and to the right. So even though I think that there's definitely been some volatility in a lot of the different cryptocurrencies that we track, there's still this overwhelming interest from consumers, especially comparatively, in investing in crypto and how to get involved. So I think that Square and PayPal are both kind of these natural beneficiaries of this interest from consumers.
Megan, I don't want to link Square and PayPal to cryptocurrencies. I want them judged, or I want to invest on them based on payments, based on Square's hardware for small businesses, based on them, eliminating cash, but still using US dollar and regular currencies. But more and more I see, like today, these stocks are linked to cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. They have a positive day today. Both are up. Why? Because you look and see, and Bitcoin is up about 7.33%. So that's why these two stocks are strong. I don't want to trade them based on that. I want to trade them based on the health and the innovation of these companies. But Megan, I'm naive, aren't I? Because these companies and cryptocurrencies are linked now for good or bad, correct?
Yeah, I think that they are really tied, but I do think that you make a good point in the fact that there are many other things. These digital wallets are so much bigger than just a cryptocurrency. So we can look at these from a volume perspective whenever we're looking at Square versus PayPal. I think Jenny tipped on this earlier that PayPal is much larger. It has a much larger footprint comparatively versus Square. But then when we look at happiness, we see Square has overall a higher consumer happiness by about 6 points versus PayPal's comprehensive platform. So I think you can kind of start to look at some differences there in terms of how that's applied. Whenever you look at just, you talk about Square's business to business profile, those mentions are up, they're trending up about 20% quarter over quarter. So I think that that's another positive element or something that you can look at for Square. But I do think that PayPal is actually gaining grounds when we look at just overall momentum. And a lot of that is driven by this crypto activity, because what all of these companies have found is that when you are adding functionality to the app, to the ecosystem, it increases overall engagement. So on PayPal's last report, they said people who had or were, using their app to invest in cryptos open the app every single day, which that increased engagement, that's definitely what you want. We've seen that drive growth and adoption of other products within Square's ecosystem. So I think that the adoption of this cryptocurrency, it may not be the only growth driver for these companies, but it definitely helps increase engagement and help keep those existing consumers around. So that's why it's really significant, at least for us to track, to make sure that consumers are happy and that consumers are staying engaged and continuing, and maybe do they start using other products.
Megan, that's a really interesting point, because I read that PayPal says, they claim, of course, this is from them being the source, that 60% of their users, once you start using PayPal, you're more than likely to continue using PayPal, which I thought was interesting, because I feel like we've talked before where I use Venmo. I've never used Cash App, and I continue to use Venmo because now it's sort of linked to all my different bank accounts. But to sort of stay away from this crypto conversation, like Kevin mentioned, because I do also have this concern with looking at crypto and looking at these names. I want to sort of, separate the two. But I have to think that these companies are heavily tied to, say, the health of the consumer, with like retail spending and some of these different topics we've talked about lately that have very difficult year-over-year comps. Are you seeing that at all with these names? Because I have to think that they sort of saw this boom at the beginning of last year when they were sort of their only way to pay one another.
Yeah, we do. And so it's really hard for us whenever you look on a year-over-year basis for PayPal and Square. They're both, down comparatively year-over-year on a big picture look. But then whenever you look at it versus 2019, so that's where you start to see a little bit more of this growth. And that's actually where we're starting to see PayPal pull ahead a little bit comparatively, at least in consumer demand growth. I think another interesting driver is that PayPal is starting to enable users to actually use the Venmo app, like you talked about, to actually purchase goods. And so I think that's going to be something really interesting to track. They essentially said that they want to make Venmo like its own super app within PayPal. So that way, whenever you check out, you can just check out with Venmo. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but I know I bought concert tickets online and had the option to just check out with Venmo. And so I did, because it was really easy and I was already using this. So I think that they expect that to be a huge driver of revenue, this increased Venmo business profile presence. And so I think that's another area that you can watch. But overall, it's just, utilizing these different products to drive engagement and keep consumers on their platform. And so I think that definitely whenever you look at these companies, Venmo is PayPal's a huge potential for growth and what we'll be tracking moving forward. Whereas Square has benefited tremendously via its Cash App and via, adoption of these cryptocurrencies and just extreme interest in Bitcoin over the last year. But now, they're kind of tied more closely to Bitcoin. So, should Bitcoin not perform as well as expected, or should Bitcoin have a bad day? I think that Square has more of its eggs in the Bitcoin basket per se than Venmo does with any specific cryptocurrency.
And Megan, I love that you bring the conversation here, because I did some numbers on this. I brought my own data here for you that actually confirms exactly to your point. Over the last year, both of these names, Square and PayPal, are very correlated to Bitcoin. Very strong correlations in the 0.8 range, 0.83 for Square, 0.84 for PayPal. But as you kind of narrow that time frame down over 3 months, which really captures this recent volatility, Kev, this might ease some of your concerns. PayPal has a negative correlation to Bitcoin during its sell-off, and Square's correlation came down substantially to 0.5. So still positively correlated, to Megan's point, maybe greater exposure to the Bitcoin and crypto space. But to me, this puts some math to a hunch that I had, which is that this is enough to really bring optimism into the space, Megan, maybe get new adopters into these platforms, but not enough to take them down.
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch, to see. I don't know if you guys have opened up the apps or to look to see how easy it is to buy and sell these cryptocurrencies within them, but it's kind of crazy whenever you can just see like, oh, you can buy 0.0001 for $20 or whatever you're trying to do. But I think that overall, as Kevin is alluding, I don't think that crypto is the end all be all for either of these apps. However, both of these apps are trying to figure out how to make their digital wallet the digital wallet for consumers, and how to keep their consumers the most highly engaged. And we've definitely, since Venmo introduced the crypto capabilities, we've seen that sentiment improve majorly. And now they're actually in the same arena. They're within 1 point whenever you look at consumer happiness from Cash App to Venmo, which I think is significant, because previously Venmo kind of hung a little bit lower. So I think both of them have a really strong, just user experience for people who are using them as digital wallets. And that's definitely something that we'll continue to monitor to see, okay, are they both now neck and neck, or do we start to see one elevate? Is there really going to be this shift? And right now it's really early, but we definitely feel some momentum for PayPal and Venmo specifically.
Good stuff. The VP of Research, LikeFolio.com, Megan Brantley. Great presentation as always, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Jenny,